Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the profound and lasting impacts of residential schools have had on First Nations communities in Canada. This topic is not only a crucial part of understanding Canadian histories, but also essential for recognizing the ongoing challenges faced by Indigenous peoples today. The legacy of residential schools is evident in the ongoing trauma, cultural loss, and socio-economic challenges that continue to affect First Nations peoples. Understanding these impacts is vital for moving towards true reconciliation and healing. Hi, my name is Kelsey, and I am not an original inhabitant of Turtle Island. Here's a little land acknowledgement as well. We are grateful to be welcomed on these lands covered by the Williams Treaties, the traditional territory of Mississaugas, part of the Anishinaabe Nation. These lands remain home to many Indigenous nations and peoples. We acknowledge the care Indigenous nations have given to Turtle Island before and after settler arrival. We recognize the troubled history and lack of friendship towards the First Nations. As treaty people in Canada, we share this history while it shapes our present by moving forward as friends and allies. It need not define our future. On this slide here, it goes over the 4 technologies I decided to use for my presentation. I use SlideSgo for my layout, Google Slides for the presentation, Bitmoji for my avatar, and Canva for my recording. Let's begin by examining the history of residential schools. Established in the late 19th century, these schools were designed to assimilate Indigenous children into Western culture, often forcibly removing them from their families. Over 150,000 children passed through these schools, where they were subjected to harsh conditions, neglect, and abuse, unfortunately. These schools were a part of a broader colonial agenda that sought to erase Indigenous identities. The government, in collaboration with various Christian dominations, believed that the best way to civilize Indigenous children was to sever their ties to family and culture. This resulted in a systematic attempt to dismantle Indigenous societies, the effects of which still are deeply felt today. We're also going to talk about the historical impact of the Indian Act of 1876, which was a key piece of legislation that created the reserve system, which still exists today. Reserves were established to confine Indigenous people to specific areas, often isolated and lacking resources. This system disrupted traditional governance and cultural practices, forcing Indigenous communities to live under government-imposed rules. The reserve system has had long-lasting effects, contributing to poverty and systematic inequality in First Nations communities. The land provided was often unsuitable for economic development, leading to persistent economic challenges and dependence on government support. These issues continue to affect First Nations today, making the Indian Act a crucial factor for understanding the ongoing struggles for autonomy and equality in Indigenous communities. The psychological and emotional scars left by residential schools are profound and pervasive. Survivors often suffer from PTSD, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. These mental health challenges are compounded by the lack of cultural sensitive support services. Intergenerational trauma is a significant issue where the effects of trauma are passed down to subsequent generations. Studies such as those by Heman show that children and grandchildren of survivors are more likely to experience mental health challenges, partly due to the disrupted family structures and loss of cultural identity. This trauma manifests in various ways, from increased suicide rates to higher incidences of domestic violence within some communities. One of the most devastating impacts of residential schools was the systematic erasure of Indigenous culture and language. Children were often forbidden to speak their native language and practice their cultural traditions. As a result, many Indigenous languages are now endangered and cultural practices have been lost or weakened. The loss of language is particularly crucial as language is a key carrier of culture and identity. When language is lost, the unique ways of thinking, storytelling, and understanding the world that are embedded in that language are also lost. Effort to revive these languages, such as the development of language immersion programs and documentation of oral histories, are crucial, but the damage done by the residential schools continue to pose significant challenges. The disrupted education and trauma experienced by residential school survivors have had a long-term socioeconomic, consequence. Many survivors left school with little to no formal education, limiting their employment opportunities and contributing to cycles of poverty and marginalization that persist to today. These socioeconomic challenges are further exacerbated by systematic discrimination in both the education system and the labor market. For instance, even today, Indigenous students are less likely to graduate from high school, and Indigenous workers often face discrimination and lower wages in the job market. This perpetuates a cycle of poverty and marginalization that is difficult to break without targeted intervention. Residential schools not only separated children from their families, but also undermined traditional family roles and relationships. Many survivors lost the ability to parent in culturally appropriate ways because they were denied the opportunity to learn these skills from their own parents or their elders. This disruption has had a profound impact on family dynamics, leading to cycles of abuse and neglect in some cases. It has also contributed to the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in foster care systems, as family bonds were weakened or broken entirely. Today, many First Nations communities are working to rebuild these family structures through culturally based parenting programs and community support services. The impacts of residential school extend beyond individuals to entire communities. The trauma experienced by one generation can affect the cohesion and resilience of the entire community. This is often referred to as collective or communal trauma. Collective trauma affects how communities function, including their ability to recognize and advocate for their rights. In some cases, it has led to a loss of trust within the community, as well as between communities and external institutions. Rebuilding the trust and resilience is a critical aspect of the healing process. Many communities are doing this by revitalizing traditional governance structures, cultural practices, and community-based healing programs. Addressing the impacts of residential schools requires a multifaceted approach. This includes providing mental health support that is culturally sensitive, revitalizing Indigenous languages and cultures, and ensuring that survivors and their families have access to education and economic opportunities. Healing also involves truth-telling and reconciliation. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada provided 94 calls to action, many of which are focused on education, health, and justice. However, progress has been very slow, and there's still much work to be done. It is vital that non-Indigenous Canadians engage with these calls to action, supporting Indigenous initiatives and advocating for government accountability. In conclusion, the legacy of residential schools is a critical issue that continues to affect First Nation communities in numerous ways. From trauma and cultural loss to socioeconomic challenges and ongoing systematic discrimination, the impacts are profound and far-reaching. Understanding and acknowledging these impacts is essential for moving towards true reconciliation. It is not enough to simply acknowledge the past. We must take action to support the healing and thriving of Indigenous peoples today. This involves listening to Indigenous voices, supporting Indigenous-led initiatives, and advocating for system change. Thank you for your attention, and I hope this presentation has helped you to shed light on the importance of this issue. On the slide are a list of some of my references. The very last one is a reference on an image on the first slide. These are the remaining references that I have. This has all the other references on here as well.